You think you're looking at a masterpiece, but it's looking back at you through your own eyes. Log number 10. Juliana Thorne was the finest restorer in New York. She had a gift for breathing life back into ancient fabrics, but Blackwood Hall demanded a different kind of price. In that house, mirrors were forbidden. The windows were shrouded in mourning silk, and time wasn't measured by a clock, but by the grinding of the loom. Juliana thought she was there to finish her aunt's work. She didn't know she was destined to become a thread in the tapestry herself.
My Aunt Clara didn't die of old age. She died of a mistake in the weave. They found her in the master bedroom of Blackwood Hall, her fingers so tightly intertwined with the threads of an unfinished tapestry that the mortician had to use surgical scissors to free her. My name is Juliana Thorne. I am a high-end textile restorer. I've spent 10 years at the Met in New York, bringing dead fabrics back to life. I thought I knew everything about the loom, the tension, the warp, the mathematical logic of the weft. But as I stood in that silent foyer, smelling the scent of bitter almonds and wet wool, I realized that some fabrics aren't meant to be restored. They are meant to be burned. Sit upon the Berkshire Hills. It bit into them like a jagged obsidian tooth. It was a house that refused to acknowledge the existence of the sun. The windows were massive, arched in the finest 19th century Gothic style, but they were all covered from the inside with heavy, midnight black silk. No mirrors. Pause. I searched every room, the grand foyer, the hallways, even the smallest vanity in the guest suite. Nothing. It was as if the Blackwood family had grown terrified of seeing what they had become. My lawyer, Mr. Arris, a man whose skin looked like yellowed parchment and who smelled faintly of formaldehyde, handed me the keys with a hand that trembled visibly. 30 days, Juliana, he whispered. You must finish the tapestry Clara started. That is the only condition. Fail, and you lose the inheritance. Succeed, and you will never have to touch a needle again. I am a woman of facts and fibers. I understand how silk is harvested, how the saracen is boiled away to reveal the luster of the thread. But the loom in the great hall was beyond my science. It stood 15 feet high, a monstrous skeleton of dark, water-stained oak and polished brass. Its gears were silent, but they gleamed as if they had been oiled with something thicker and darker than grease. The tapestry was half finished. It depicted a garden, but a garden seen through a funeral veil. The flowers were shades of bruised purple, charcoal gray, and a red so deep it looked like dried scabs. But the silk, I had never seen thread like this. It was thinner than a human hair, but so strong it cut through my protective gloves. And it was black. Not dyed black, it looked as if the thread itself was made of concentrated, liquid shadow. As I touched it, I felt a vibration travel up my arm. Thump shoe, a rhythmic pulse, like a giant heart beating somewhere beneath the floorboards. The first night, the silence of Blackwood became a physical weight. I followed the rhythmic pulse of the house to the conservatory, where the moon cut through the gaps in the black curtains like a cold razor. That's where I found him. Mark. He was standing by a dead rosebush, smoking a cigarette that smelled of clove and dry leaves. He was younger than I expected, with eyes that looked like they had been scrubbed of all color, a pale, translucent gray. He told me he was the groundskeeper, but his hands were the hands of a master. Long, thin fingers with scars at the tips, the telltale marks of someone who has spent a lifetime pulling thread against skin. "You shouldn't be here, Juliana," he said, his voice a low, melodic warning. "The Blackwoods don't keep memories in books. They keep them in the warp. And once you enter the pattern begins to own you." He reached out and touched the silk on my sleeve, and for a second, I thought I saw a thin, black line running across his throat. A seam, as if he were nothing but a garment wearing a man's shape. By the fifth day, the house began to change me. I was working on a cluster of lilies in the corner of the tapestry, using a silver needle that felt unusually warm to the touch. As a restorer, I am used to long hours, but this was different. I felt light. I looked down at my hands, and my breath hitched. My fingertips were no longer flesh-toned. They were turning a dull, chalky gray. The color wasn't fading. It was being pulled out of my skin. I watched, paralyzed, as a thin stream of vibrant, hazel pigment, the exact color of my own eyes, traveled up the silver needle like liquid lightning and disappeared into the black thread. I looked at the lilies on the tapestry. They were no longer charcoal. They were turning hazel. My hazel. The loom wasn't just a machine. It was a siphon. Every stitch I made was a piece of my identity being etched into the fabric. I was being unraveled, one memory at a time. I couldn't stay in the hall. I fled to the library, looking for answers in my aunt's personal ledgers. Behind a false front of legal books, I found a diary bound in a material that felt disturbingly like human parchment. It belonged to Margaret Blackwood, 1892. Her handwriting was a frantic scrawl. "The Master says we are the vessels," she wrote. "The silk is not spun, it is distilled. To create the bitter silk, one must give up the light of their soul. Today, I forgot the sound of my mother's voice. Tomorrow, I will forget my own face. But the garden is so beautiful. It is the only place where we truly live." I realized then that the Blackwood fortune, the oil rights, the shipping empires, wasn't built on trade. It was built on the literal distillation of human experience. Every luxury they owned was paid for in the stolen years of their own daughters. I needed to see the source. I followed the rhythmic thumping thumpshoe down into the cellar. Not the wine cellar, but a hidden level carved directly into the obsidian rock. When I flipped the industrial lights, I fell to my knees. It wasn't a basement. It was a farm. Thousands of translucent, gray cocoons hung from the ceiling like bloated fruit. Inside each one was a woman. Some were ancient, their skin like discarded lace. Others were younger, their mouths open in a silent, eternal scream. They were still breathing. Silver tubes ran from their spines directly into the floor, feeding the loom upstairs. I saw Aunt Clara. She was the freshest cocoon. Her eyes were wide, glazed with a milky film, but as my flashlight hit her, she blinked. A single black thread leaked from her eye like a tear. She wasn't dead. She was being archived. And I was the replacement. I confronted Mark in the center of the great hall. The loom was humming a violent, discordant tune now. "What are you?" I screamed, my voice sounding like the snap of a dry branch. Mark stepped into the moonlight, and for the first time, I saw him without the shadows. His skin wasn't just pale, it had a weave. A fine, microscopic pattern of silk. "I am the Master's greatest achievement, Juliana. I am a memory given weight. I was created 100 years ago from the collective longing of the women in the basement. I am the bait." He reached out, his hand trembling. "But the memory they used to make me, it was a memory of love. And love is the only thing the loom cannot fully digest. I don't want to harvest you. I want to unravel. He handed me a silver shuttle, cold as ice. Finish the pattern, but don't use their thread. Use your own. I sat at the loom. My fingers were almost transparent now, the bones visible beneath the gauzy skin. But I am a restorer. I know how to fix a flaw, and I know how to introduce a poison. I didn't reach for the spools of bitter silk. Instead, I grabbed the silver needle and drove it deep into my own palm. I didn't focus on my happy memories. I focused on the cold New York winters, the loneliness of the archives, the betrayal of my family, and the absolute, burning rage I felt for this house. I began to weave my trauma. The silk coming out of my hand wasn't black. It was a corrosive, burning red. It traveled through the warp like a virus. The loom began to scream, a sound of grinding metal and tearing fabric. The garden on the tapestry began to wither. The lilies turned to ash. The house itself began to shake as I fed it the one thing it couldn't archive, the will to destroy. The explosion was silent. A shockwave of white dust and snapping threads. When I opened my eyes, the loom was gone. The silk on the windows had shredded into nothing. Mark was gone too, leaving only a pile of gray ash on the floorboards. I walked out of Blackwood Hall as the sun rose over the Atlantic. I thought I had won. I thought I had broken the cycle. But as I reached the gate, I felt a strange stiffness in my joints. I looked at my reflection in the window of my car, the first mirror I'd seen in weeks. My skin was perfect, flawless. It had the luster of the finest oriental silk. I tried to scream, but my voice was a melody of a recorded sound. I looked down at my wrist and saw a small, elegant tag stitched into my flesh. Property of the Blackwood Archive. Item 1001. Title: The Restorer's Revenge. I hadn't destroyed the house. I had simply provided it with a better ending. I am the new masterpiece. And somewhere, in a lawyer's office in the city, another niece is receiving a ring of iron keys.
The house in Vermont burned to the ground, but the tapestry survived. Now, Juliana is exhibit number 1001. She achieved the perfection she always sought, but the price was eternal stillness behind museum glass. And yesterday I learned that a new niece has inherited the keys to Blackwood Hall. The archive never truly closes. It just waits for the next restorer.